Welcome to episode 3 of NIL Active. I'm Dave McGriff, and I'm excited to welcome to the podcast on this episode, Braly Keller of Opendorse. How are you doing today, Braly?
Hey, Dave. I'm doing well. It's great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming on. Now, you work at Opendorse. You're an NIL specialist there, but you yourself play 2 sports in college. How does that experience inform your work at Opendorse?
Yeah, I think having the ability to be an athlete in college has shaped a lot of my perception of what NIL is and the juggle that is between your practices, your games, your competition, and your schoolwork, and then this new opportunity in NIL. And for me, I think specifically being a football player and a swimmer too, was a balance between being that focal point sport. And I was Division III level, so it's a little different. We're not drawing 90,000 fans each Saturday, but being in a sport like football, which does receive a lot of the notoriety in the press and everything like that, versus being in an Olympic sport too, and swimming, and understanding that you have an even smaller crowd turning out, and it's a different breed of athletes in that sport versus football too. So I like to think I can see both sides of the coin here when it comes to NIL and the balance that athletes have to have as they're starting to explore this entirely new entrepreneurial world.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. What are some of the misconceptions you think people have about being a college athlete?
Yeah, I think from the gate, there's a misconception that athletes are always Division I athletes. I think what Americans have is a perception of collegiate athletics is what they see on ESPN on the weekends, what they see for SportsCenter top 10 highlights, right? But there's more than 500,000 college athletes out there, and the vast majority of them are not the ones playing on Saturdays on television. So I think that is a misconception right away. And I think there's also a misconception that athletes are hyper-focused just on their sport and there's nothing else out there. But there's so many athletes with talents outside of their sport, interests outside of their sport, whether it's their major or art, arts talents, musical talents, whatever it could be, right? That start to find their way into this NIL stream of things, and athletes have been able to monetize it for the first time, really, since they've begun competing as an athlete, which is a great win.
Absolutely. And what would you say is something that you hear from your students that you work with in terms of things that they need in terms of resources that may not be getting fulfilled at the universities?
Yeah, I think one of the major points that's received a lot of notoriety as of late has been financial literacy, and you might have seen that out there in the Twitter sphere, in the NIL articles that have been published lately. And I think as a response, Opendorse has started to lean deeper into this and start to uncover where are the athletes that we're existing to support. Where are they coming from? What is their background? We can easily jump to conclusions that athletes are making hundreds and thousands of millions of dollars, but what formal education do they have on tax preparation, on owning a business, on establishing an LLC? All of these concepts that are thrown around very quickly in NIL articles, how much education do athletes have on that? So I think in that line, there's been a call from athletes to get some more hands-on direction, some more hands-on education on what all that looks like, because I think there is a hunger for athletes to participate in NIL, but apart from a business approaching them directly, I think a lot of athletes still feel unequipped for navigating NIL. So that bleeds in part to what I was alluding to in the U.S. Bank partnership that Opendorse recently announced. So being able to provide continued education for athletes through our app and through the resources that can be found on there to help athletes who could be making their first money ever in their life. Realistically, this could be the first time they've ever had a job, helping them not only secure their payment, but be able to take that, turn it into their bank account, invest it, whatever the avenues could be for it, right? But making sure athletes are ready from step one.
Right. So I know when I was 19 in college, I was, barely scraping together any kind of money I had, but I certainly didn't have any kind of wherewithal in terms of, how much money I should be putting away. getting on a budget, establishing a savings account, things of that nature. So that's the kind of stuff I imagine that U.S. Bank is providing to the players that are accessing Opendorse.
Yeah, no question. And I think, again, we go back to what people perceive as the college athletes of the world, the ones that you see on your social media feeds. But I also think it's important to note when data is put out and published around what athletes are earning. A lot of times you'll see the figures at the Power 5 level and assume that that's what's happening carrying down the line, but that's also not the case. And so understanding, like you mentioned, you're 19 years old, you're scraping together food for the weekend or, partying money, whatever it is, right? The money that you're looking for can now come through NIL. And even if it is a $50 deal, we've heard accounts of athletes saying, look, that's going to be paying my utilities for the month, right, or that's now cash to take my girlfriend out on a date or something like that. So right. There's one example I think I found really interesting too, is an athlete laid out their entire schedule for the week, and they said, where is my money going? Everything from their rent payment down to the dog food that they have to buy for their pet once a month. So they listed this out in their budget, and they said, well, how can I leverage my NIL to pay for every one of these? And he had set it out for his own goal to have his entire lifestyle accounted for. And it was a really cool exercise. And I believe he's on his way to being successful in that, and secured a partnership for him and his dog, to be able to get his food paid for. So just cool ways that NIL is not just a $1,000 endorsement deal or whatever it could be, right? This is a lifestyle approach.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that with my clients, I talk to a lot in different NIL agents, is talking about marrying the athlete's interests and stuff that they do every day anyway with a particular brand partner, because then they've already experienced it. They know the product, and it just makes sense to endorse something that you actually use in real life. So how do students access Opendorse? How do they get into your system, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's right in their pockets. So when an athlete decides that NIL is something that they want to engage in, they can download the Opendorse app from the gate, and they can create a profile for free. They can turn that profile public. Essentially, it's their own storefront is their profile. We've seen athletes put it in their Twitter bios, their Instagram bios, much like you'd see huddle highlight links in high schoolers' Twitter profiles and everything like that. That's what they've been doing for their Opendorse links. So athletes can create a profile. They can jump into the app, find those resources that I mentioned earlier, US Bank, for an example. They have access to different resources. We have an Opendorse masterclass where we brought in experts from TikTok and Twitch for athletes to be able to connect with and really learn from who the experts are in their respective field. There's also an opportunities board for athletes. So when they jump in, if they're not the type of athlete who are receiving inbound deals, so and the vast majority of athletes are having to hustle a bit for their deals, there's an opportunity board. So think of it like your typical job board where you can jump on and apply for something. That's the same thing in Opendorse. So an athlete can find an entire list of companies that are interested in working with college athletes. They have a deal brief, and they have certain specifications on what the brand is expecting from the athlete. But the athlete can hit apply, and that's their way of bridging this gap between themselves and companies in the space. So hoping that this Opendorse app is the one-stop shop for athletes, and working towards that goal of Opendorse and NIL being synonymous terms, where athletes start to understand that Opendorse is this tool in my pocket that will help me be successful, be my compass throughout this entire new world.
Right. You were able to secure a deal for your brother, and your mother was involved. What was the story there?
Yeah. So I've recently moved to Augusta, Georgia. I'm originally from Nebraska. And so I haven't been able to be home as much as of late, but my mom's birthday was a few weeks ago, and my younger brother's still in Nebraska. So I wanted to see what NIL was like from the other side of the table. We had an exercise that our CEO, Blake Lawrence, had encouraged of of us within the company and encouraged us to experience Opendorse again from the buyer's perspective. So went to one of my favorite college athletes in my brother and pitched him to make an appearance at home with some of my mom's favorite food. And he sent me a picture to prove that he was actually there. So it was really interesting, Dave, to think about it from that other angle, to jump into a marketplace where, there's 75,000 athletes and trying to determine, okay, who would I want to work with? What would I want from them? Am I looking for an autograph? Am I looking for a video shout out, an appearance? What does that look like? And then going through and even entering credit card, seeing what it's like from that expert, that experience and chatting with the athlete and everything on that end. So pretty eye-opening for what may appear to be a very silly deal just to my brother, but it was cool. So appreciate you asking.
Yeah, I thought that was a great story. I really did. I have a son who's a college athlete, and he's D1 now, but last year he played for Salt Lake. What is it? SLCC, Salt Lake Community College, and they are in the NJCAA. And he led them to a championship, the championship game. They lost in the championship game, but they had a really good season. But what I noticed about that conference is that they really had a strong fan base in these different areas. He was in the Western region, so it was Utah, Idaho. There's one California team, and a couple of teams in Nevada. And I noticed that they really had a strong fan base. A lot of crowds, a lot of energy at the games. And it was something that I was really impressed with, because before he was playing in that conference, I wasn't really aware of it. And so I noticed that Opendorse did a partnership with NJCAA, and I wanted to see how that came about and how it's going.
Yeah, great question, and it's really cool to hear about your son too. I would argue the NJCAA is a hidden gem from the public eye on what college athletics is too, right? We're talking about what's more than meets the eye to see with everything in the industry, and I do think there's stories out there of athletes who have taken the road less traveled from JUCO up to Power 5 or last chance U type scenarios that are out there. But I think this partnership is extremely organic and fits in line with Opendorse's vision as a company, which is to help every athlete. That's not help every Power 5 athlete. This is helping athletes of all levels. So for us, this partnership does mean a great deal in that we're able to provide this same level of education and resources to athletes within the NJCAA and their membership schools, and provide them content sharing tools, a marketplace, and everything that is at an elite class. So the same tools that professional athletes even and Olympians that we partnered with through Team USA, the same tools that they have are in the pockets of NJCAA athletes. So we're excited. And again, I think it is a good marriage between what our company values and our goals are and what their association has as well.
All right. So what are some of the creative NIL deals that you've seen on the market?
Yeah. One exercise that I've done lately too is trying to imagine different ways that fans are experiencing NIL. So this is going to sound like a roundabout answer, but bear with me here for a second, Dave. So
sure.
There were some studies that were out there last year that showed that fans had engaged with athletes at less than 10% of their traditional NIL activity rate. So what I mean by that is, of the athletes who have done deals, about 4% of them have received deals from fans. There's an alternative study by Arizona State's Global Institute, which said, frankly, most fans had heard of NIL, but they couldn't identify it. So that got the gears turning to think, okay, where are places that fans can engage with NIL activities, opportunities, everything of that extent. So to get to your question more directly, some of the ones which come to mind right away are Noah Sewell at Oregon. So Oregon's collective Division Street had worked to host an Airbnb. So this is a customized Airbnb in Eugene, and Noah had the opportunity to honestly customize this entire, I think it was 2-bedroom apartment or unit, whatever it is. It's kind of like welcome to my crib style. So he had his jersey up. It was all decked out in green and yellow. And for the fan angle, right, you could be coming in from that Kayvon Thibodeau to stick in the Oregon lens here, his deal with United Airlines. You could be flying to Eugene on a United Airlines flight that was brought to you by Kayvon Thibodeau. You'd be staying in Noah's crib pregame. You could be going to that local restaurant to get some Tracktown USA pizza and be able to get a custom slice by whatever athlete on the team that you can think of. And then you can step into the game where they have on the big screen or in your media guide FAQs around NIL. So, that maybe that's not as direct of a question or an answer to your question as you're thinking, but I think
it definitely is.
Really, it's really interesting to think about the different aspects that start to engage with the fan experience in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking that I really like that because it's about fan engagement, and it's one of the things that I think there's a lot of growth potential in that subsection of NIL. I want to make sure I heard that your numbers right. Did you say that it's only 4% fan engagement? Could you repeat that number?
Yeah. So from last year's data, Opendorse did a deep dive on industry insights from last year, and after the first year of NIL, out of the athletes who had received deals, approximately 4% of them had received deals from fans, as opposed to the vast majority of them coming from collectives and donors and brands. So, a smaller segment, but I think it speaks to where the education came from. So if you put yourself in your son's shoes or any college athlete's shoes, they had heard about NIL probably for the first time around June of last year, maybe around that July 1st flip. They had gotten programming from their schools, as a lot of schools have created these partnerships with Opendorse and other third parties. So the athletes started to get some education here. Now, on the other side of it, if you have a product, if you want to think of athletes in this situation, if you have an offering, you have to have a buyer. And the buyers, in this case, the fans and brands, they didn't receive that education. What they had for a conception of NIL was what they saw in newspaper articles, what they heard on the news, what articles were on Twitter, everything like that. So they didn't receive that formal direction on NIL. So now we have this is my fun analogy for it. It's like middle school dance where you've got boys and girls on each side of the gym and it's really awkward and you don't know who's going to initiate with who first. So you've got your athletes on one side and they have somewhat of formal education, but they do have this misconception that they're going to have thousands of dollars worth of deals sitting in their lap starting on July 1st. And then this July 2nd misconception falls in and they're like, well, I didn't get deals. What is NIL? How do I engage in this? And so as we've started to step in towards year two, we're starting to see that fans and brands are receiving some education in some direction from schools, whether it's through booster education preseason, through in-venue promotions, through what you might see in these in media guys and everything to that extent. So as the other side of this awkward gymnasium interaction starts to get more information on it, I think we're going to see an uptick in that percentage and the engagement from fans. So it's going to be an interesting evolution behind this, but there are so many accounts that we've heard of athletes being the ones to educate local businesses, some creative ones too, of athletes where they've gotten ice cream flavors named after them. Yeah. I can tell you, for example, that athlete had to go into the ice cream shop and say, hey, you may or may not have heard of NIL, but it's a thing. I can get paid. I love your ice cream. And here's how we can do it. Here's the rules I have to follow. So imagine how intimidating that would be as an athlete to already be out of your comfort zone, likely, and pitching yourself to someone. And then having to educate them at the same turn, all while hoping they say yes to whatever engagement deal you want to do.
It puts the athlete almost in a position of being a salesperson because they're selling themselves in the midst of creating this brand for themselves. And I remember that I got the advice when I was young that at some point in your life, I need to have a sales job. It didn't matter what I sold, but I needed to sell something. So I was selling cars for a while. And the idea is that you try to get out of that comfort zone. And the fact that sales we all are salespersons in some point of view, where we're selling ourselves for a job interview or some other kind of relationship that we're trying to build. There's an element of knowing who you are, what your brand is, so to speak, and being able to present it in a clear and concise way to someone else and make it appealing to someone else. And so NIL gives student athletes an opportunity to learn that lesson early on that, they may not have otherwise had. I mean, if they're just focusing on their studies and athletics, it's a lesson that may have to come later in life. And with NIL, it's presented to them much earlier. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, no question about it. And I don't think I mentioned much of this in my background either as being an athlete, but was heavily involved with National SAC and it's the Student Athlete Advisory Committee. It's really the representative voice of athletes to administration. And for me, it was even to the NCAA level. And as we were talking back in 2018, 2019, 2020 about what NIL rules could be, what they could look like for athletes, that was a big argument that the athlete angle had made. And I think the administration had agreed with was, this is not just temporary cash in the pocket for athletes, but this can develop into life skills and a business and really a career for athletes too. So hearing you say that about selling yourself, being able to put yourself outside your comfort zone is exactly what I believe the premise of NIL should be and where NIL can be for good, where athletes can start to find an interest in legal concepts like setting up your own LLC. The tax implication conversations were not very interesting a year and a half ago, but when you start to talk about how this applies to them, it's fascinating how ears can perk up really quickly.
Absolutely. It changes from something where their eyes would be glazing over into something that they're really interested in because it affects them and it affects them potentially right now as they're going through their college career. Another deal I was really excited to read about was the deal that Opendorse struck with Twitter and the Pac-12, enabling student athletes, football players right now, to monetize their game highlights. And I saw a tweet from, I don't remember if it was yesterday or Sunday, but one of the players from ASU tweeted about how happy he was that he was able to monetize his game highlights from this weekend. How did that come about?
Yeah, Dave, I appreciate you asking this because I get to be more or less the conveyor of good news and a dream that I know Blake Lawrence, our CEO, and Audie Kanalik, our co-founder, they've had this vision and this desire to bring this content, these highlights, to athletes in their feeds for years. The Opendorse has been around for over a decade now, and I think to that extent, as much as I'd love to take credit for this partnership, I get to just tell you about how cool it is. And so for Tempest Axe is threefold in terms of who's involved here. Tempest Axe has acquired the rights through the Pac-12 to these highlights, so they're able to clip it up, and it's what you end up seeing on the feed ultimately. So as Pac-12 and Tempest Axe have come to this agreement, there's an avenue to where this content needs to get shared to the athletes. And so in the Opendorse app, there's content folders where athletes can receive this content. And so the athletes have at their disposal now highlights from the game, whether it's them or their teammates, big plays, whatever it could be. And so that content, once it's in the athlete's hands, now has the ability to be published, tap to publish on Twitter. So what you see on their feed was put up almost instantaneously as the athlete tapped the green button to publish it. And where this comes into the NIL question now, like to that point, right, there's nothing too earth-shattering about it. That was athletes sharing highlights. We've seen that online before. But now where this truly becomes groundbreaking is that through Twitter Sports' ad monetization program, we've come to this partnership where when the athlete puts that content online, Twitter has a pre-roll ad that will play before it. Now, this could vary. I don't know if you saw it on the ASU clip or not, but because it depends on the audience and in terms of how they set up the advertisement. But once the pre-roll ad plays before that clip, the athlete will be able to receive a share of that revenue that comes from the ad. It's like when you jump on YouTube and you get a 30-second ad before your video. So that piece of it there is where this starts to become groundbreaking, and it being truly the first time that athletes of any level, of any sport, have been able to monetize their highlights. And that's, again, something back to kudos to the Opendorse team that has been here years before me, and the fact that they've been pushing for this. I believe it maybe even started at the NFL level, and that hasn't happened in the professional ranks, but now it's trailblazing with the Pac-12 in the collegiate space. So all in all, I'm glad you got to see that, and I'm excited for what's to come too, because it's really special that athletes and a lot of what athletes are known for in terms of what they're able to do on the field now comes into a space where it can be monetized, and I think that's another big win for the NIL space.
Right. Yeah, it definitely is something that, I've heard student athletes not so much complain about, but, kind of lament the fact that they couldn't monetize not only their game highlights, but the names that are back in jerseys. And the name on jerseys has been addressed to a certain extent. A lot of different schools have entered into deals. BYU just did one for the whole football team, in which the athletes get a share in revenue on merchandise. But now this with game highlights, it's a whole nother thing. And I think it's going to grow from different conferences, different sports. I'm going to put in my own plug to get Atlantic 10 basketball on there, because that's the conference my son plays in. It's a strong basketball conference. Check them out.
We'd love it. We'd love it. Send them our way.
Yeah. So I think that it's going to be something that really kind of could be a game changer for not only NIL but college sports in general. So I'm really, really excited about that.
Yeah.
So,
oh no, sorry. I was just gonna say it's very cool to think of it this way. Like the jerseys are some of the first ones people go to. The EA Sports, college football, video games, right? There's a few of these landmark Mount Rushmore-esque NIL opportunities. Cars going to SMU athletes, however people want to view this, right? I think there's a lot of groundbreaking things happening, and it's really humbling to see athletes be able to do what people have been talking about for years now.
That's great. That's great. So one last question before we wrap up. Since we are talking about game-changing type deals, what are some of the developments that you can anticipate occurring in NIL in the near future, or even long term?
Yeah. I think apart from those last couple I mentioned, right, around EA Sports and
video games are probably the next big thing.
Which, well, I'll leave it to experts out on Twitter to determine when and where that'll happen. But yes, very, very excited about that. But I do think there's, to the point I made earlier, right, around fans engaging with NIL.
Right.
I'm surprised continuously around what the creativity levels of fans and local businesses and athletes alike are. And I think as this fan segment becomes unlocked, I don't know if you went to a game on Saturday or if you watched any games on TV, but
watch games.
So following a lot of those games, maybe you saw on Twitter after the fact, there's schools that are putting up NIL marketplaces and QR codes on their big boards and everything like that. So
that's right.
As they start to bridge that gap, I think the opportunities become limitless. One of the coolest examples that I can think of too, back to the unique one, is Kugler Vision. They specialize in LASIK eye surgery, and they're based out of Nebraska. And they offered LASIK eye surgery to every Husker athlete that attends the University of Nebraska in exchange for promotion of their business. So
that's outstanding.
We're talking about truly a life-changing opportunity where their vision is improved, and that's something that I don't think anyone would have thought of to be an opportunity before.
Right.
More and more of that too.
Right. Jameis Winston could have used that back when he was at Florida State, but he finally took care of it now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Braly. You guys are doing great work at Opendorse. Seems like every other day when I'm opening Twitter, it's something that Opendorse needs to be congratulated on, that they've done yet a new kind of game-changing or groundbreaking type activity that helps student athletes in the NIL market. So that's great.
Appreciate it. And thanks for having me too.
You're welcome. that's it for episode 3 of NIL Active. Keep watching. New episodes will be coming soon. Thanks.